They taped the eviction notice to my front door, bold red letters screaming that I had 7 days to leave my own home. Failure to comply with HOA regulations. HOA. There was no HOA when I bought this house. I wasn't the only one. My neighbors had already been bullied into paying thousands in fees to a group of frauds, a fake homeowners association that had no legal standing, no authority, and no right to demand a single cent. And the man behind it? Greg Dawson, a slick-talking con artist who strutted around like a king, threatening hard-working families and lining his pockets with their fear. "You can take it to court," he smirked, arms crossed when I confronted him, "but you'd be wasting your time." He had no idea who he was talking to, because I wasn't just another terrified homeowner. I was a prosecutor, and by the time I was done, Greg Dawson would regret every single threat he ever made. But let's start from the beginning. I never thought I'd be fighting for my own home, but here I was, standing in my doorway, gripping a bright red eviction notice with shaky hands. My heart pounded as I reread the words, trying to process the sheer audacity of it. Failure to comply with HOA regulations. Immediate eviction in 7 days. My first reaction? Confusion. Then anger. My name is Daniel Carter, and I'm a prosecutor specializing in real estate fraud. 2 years ago, I bought this house, a spacious, peaceful property just outside Austin, Texas. No HOA, no ridiculous rules, just a quiet place to call my own. That was the whole point of moving here. And now, out of nowhere, I was being told to pack up and leave. I stepped off my porch, eyes scanning the quiet street, neatly trimmed lawns, parked cars, a few neighbors chatting near their mailboxes. It looked like any other calm suburban morning, yet I suddenly felt like I was in enemy territory. HOA? What HOA? There wasn't one when I moved in. I stormed over to Linda's house, my next-door neighbor, and knocked hard. She answered a moment later, her frail frame barely filling the doorway. She was a retired schoolteacher, kind and soft-spoken, but when she saw the notice in my hands, she visibly paled. "Oh, no," she whispered. "They came for you, too." I frowned. "What do you mean, too?" She sighed, stepping back to let me in. Her house was warm, smelling faintly of coffee and lavender. I followed her to the kitchen, where she pulled a thick folder from a drawer. She spread out multiple letters, notices, and invoices across the table, each stamped with an official-looking HOA seal. "This started months ago," she explained. "They showed up one day, claiming the HOA had been reinstated. Said we all owed back payments. I tried to fight it, but they were relentless. They kept sending notices, calling at all hours. One night, I woke up to find my trash cans missing. The next day, my mailbox was smashed." She looked away, ashamed. "I paid them $2,000 just to make it stop." My jaw tightened. They extorted her, and she wasn't the only victim. Across the street, Tom, a former Marine, had his car towed right out of his driveway when he refused to pay a $500 parking violation fine. The so-called HOA had even tried to charge another neighbor, Megan, for having the wrong color curtains. It wasn't just harassment. A former used car salesman with no legal authority but a ton of arrogance. According to Linda, he strutted around like a dictator, barking orders, threatening homeowners, and fining anyone who didn't comply. He claimed that the neighborhood's old HOA had been reinstated, and that every homeowner was now legally bound to follow its rules. Except there was just one problem. I knew HOA law, and what Greg was doing? Completely illegal. I clenched the eviction notice in my fist. They had no real power, no jurisdiction over my property, and yet They had terrorized this neighborhood for months, scaring good people into handing over their hard-earned money. Well, they just messed with the wrong guy. I wasn't just angry. I was furious. These people had bullied my neighbors, stolen their money, and threatened their homes. And now, they thought they could do the same to me? Big mistake. The first thing I did was dig into the records. As a prosecutor, I had access to county databases, and within minutes, I confirmed what I already suspected. No legally registered HOA existed in my neighborhood. That meant one thing. These people were operating a complete scam. I needed proof, and I needed to send a message. So I decided to go straight to the source. The confrontation. Greg Dawson's house was exactly what I expected. A tacky, oversized McMansion sitting on a property way too small for its grandeur. It had 3 expensive cars parked in the driveway, all meticulously polished. A fake display of wealth. I marched up to the front door and knocked, loudly. A moment later, the door swung open, revealing a tall, balding man with a smug grin plastered across his face. "You must be Carter," he said, arms crossed, eyes scanning me like a salesman sizing up his next victim. "I was wondering when you'd show up." His confidence was sickening. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it up. "You owe $3,200 in HOA fees. Pay up or you're out." I barely resisted the urge to laugh. Instead, I reached into my own folder and handed him a certified copy of my property deed. "This house is not under any HOA jurisdiction," I said, voice calm but firm. "You have no legal authority here. I'm not paying you a dime." Greg scanned the document, and for just a second I saw it. Hesitation. He hadn't expected me to come prepared, but then the smirk returned. "That's not how it works, buddy," he said, slipping the paper into his back pocket like it meant nothing. "The HOA was reinstated, and if you don't comply, we'll take legal action." I stepped forward, locking eyes with him. "Oh, you'll take legal action? Good. I'll see you in court." I turned and walked away, forcing myself not to slam his door off its hinges. As I stepped off his porch, something caught my eye. A stack of fake eviction notices, ready to be delivered to more unsuspecting homeowners. That was all the confirmation I needed. This wasn't just about me. This was a full-scale fraud operation. Digging deeper. That night, I sat in my home office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents, my laptop glowing in the dim light. I started digging deep. I checked state business records. No Ridgewood HOA registered. I looked up tax filings. No reported income or HOA dues. I even checked local government filings. No board meetings, no governing documents, nothing. This HOA didn't exist, which meant Greg and his cronies were running an elaborate extortion scheme, making up rules and fees just to line their own pockets. I had them. Or at least, I thought I did. Until the threats started. The retaliation. The next morning, I woke up to a low, rumbling engine outside. I looked out my window, and my stomach dropped. A tow truck was in my driveway. My car was already hooked up, the chains locked tight around the tires. I threw open the door and stormed outside. A man in a grease-stained uniform turned to me and held up a clipboard. "You got a fine," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. He tapped the paper. $750 for unauthorized parking. I laughed. A dry, incredulous laugh. "Unauthorized parking?" I repeated. "On my own property?" The driver shrugged. "Orders from the HOA." I took a slow breath, then stepped forward until I was right in his face. "You're going to unhook my car," I said, voice dangerously calm, "or I'm filing grand theft auto charges." The guy hesitated. He wasn't expecting a fight. For a few seconds, he just stood there, eyes darting between me and the tow truck. Then, with a muttered curse, he pulled out a remote and released the chains. The truck rumbled back down the street, leaving me standing there, seething. That's when I knew they weren't going to stop. Not until I tore them down for good. I knew Greg Dawson was a fraud. I knew he was extorting homeowners and running a fake HOA to line his own pockets. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof. The kind of evidence that would hold up in court and make sure he never pulled this scam again. So I did what any good prosecutor would do. I set a trap. Step 1. Hidden cameras. Greg and his goons were bold. They had already sent fake fines, threatened eviction, and even tried to steal my car. I had no doubt they'd try something else. That night, I installed security cameras around my house. Front door, driveway, backyard, even hidden angles near my mailbox. I wasn't taking any chances. I even went a step further. I placed a tiny recording device inside my mailbox. If they tried to drop off another fake notice or tamper with my property, I'd have clear audio and video evidence. Then, I waited. Step 2. A fake payment. Greg had been shaking down homeowners for thousands of dollars, demanding cash only, no receipts, no paper trail. If I could catch him in the act, he wouldn't be able to talk his way out of it. That's when I called Mike, a close friend and paralegal. "Mike," I said, "I need you to play the role of a scared homeowner, someone who's desperate to pay their HOA fees and willing to do whatever Greg says." Mike loved the idea. The next morning, he called Greg, putting on his best, nervous, intimidated voice. Hi, Mr. Dawson. I don't want any trouble. I just want to settle my HOA debt." Greg took the bait immediately. "Smart choice," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Bring the cash to Benson's Cafe at 3 p.m. tomorrow. No checks, no credit cards, just cash." Perfect. Step 3. Bringing in law enforcement. With the meeting set, I spent the night organizing every piece of evidence I had. Fake fines, eviction notices, county records proving there was no legal HOA Greg's financial records, or lack thereof. Then, I made one very important call. A friend of mine worked at the Attorney General's office. When I laid out what was happening, he didn't hesitate. "We'll be there," he said. Everything was set. The sting the next afternoon, Mike sat at a small corner table in Benson's Cafe, an envelope full of marked bills in his hands. Greg strolled in, casual as ever, like he had done this 100 times before. He sat down, leaned in, and spoke in low, confident tones. "You're making the right choice," Greg said, reaching for the envelope. "Just keep up with your payments, and there won't be any problems." The moment his fingers touched the cash, the doors burst open. "Greg Dawson, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and impersonating a legal entity. Hands behind your back." 2 plainclothes officers grabbed Greg, twisting his arms behind him as he stammered in disbelief. "Wait, what? No, this is a mistake." The handcuffs clicked into place. I stepped forward, arms crossed, looking him dead in the eye. "Guess you won't be evicting anyone now, huh?" Greg Dawson walked into the courtroom like a man who still thought he could talk his way out of this. His usual smug arrogance was still there, at first. But as the evidence stacked up against him, I watched his confidence drain away piece by piece. The prosecution laid it all out. Fake HOA notices, printed on official-looking letterhead. Falsified fines, some as high as $5,000, mailed to homeowners who never even belonged to an HOA. Threats of eviction backed by completely forged legal documents. Over $300,000 collected in fees from terrified homeowners across multiple neighborhoods. Greg's scheme wasn't just a one-time scam. He had been running this for years, preying on the elderly, single parents, and anyone too scared to fight back. When the judge finally spoke, the entire courtroom went silent. "Mr. Dawson, You defrauded innocent homeowners, used intimidation, and issued fake legal documents. Your actions were deliberate, calculated, and cruel. You are sentenced to 7 years in prison and a $500,000 restitution order." Greg's face went ghost white, his jaw clenched. For the first time ever, he had nothing to say. The aftermath. But for me, it wasn't over yet. I made sure every homeowner he scammed filed a civil lawsuit. One by one, his ill-gotten fortune disappeared, forced to repay every single person he had exploited. By the time we were done, he had nothing left. And then, karma hit harder. Greg's own McMansion, the oversized palace he loved so much, was foreclosed. He couldn't afford his legal fees, and the bank took everything. The best part? The neighborhood threw a party the day his house was repossessed. Lawn chairs, barbecue, champagne. And I just stood there, sipping my coffee, watching as the tow truck hauled his car away. Justice served.